I just need to make a few brief announcements before we start. For all speakers, are all the speakers in the room? Could you raise your hands, please? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Okay, so speakers, please. Because we're recording, you can put your hands down, thank you. Because we're recording, I'm asked to tell you that you have to stand at the lectern and not move too far. You can't come this way or your pointer won't work, and you're being recorded standing there, so you don't have the liberty of walking around and waving your arms too much. You can stand there and wave your arms, but don't move around too much. Okay, so that's one thing. Please, if anyone has a telephone, switch it off onto silent. We're going to have all of our questions and answers at the end of this session, so just as in the last session, but it's important that speakers keep to their time, perhaps save a minute or two if they can, so we do have time for questions at the end. So with that, I'm going to introduce the first paper in this session. So the session is this part of the session is contract and cost management. The first paper is paper 217, a lean perspective of stakeholder integration in public-private partnerships, PPPs. And this is a paper by Zina Maleb and Farouk Hamzeh. And Farouk is going to present the paper. Please welcome Farouk.
What about now? Too close, too far? Good? Right amount? All right. Okay, so this paper is out of the thesis work for master student Zina Malab. So this paper is about PPPs and specifically about integration in PPPs. So the outline is the following: first, an introduction, an overview, problem statement, and the research contribution. Then I'm going to talk about the methodology, research methods used in this research. Then we're going to talk about the special purpose vehicle. This is the main topic of the paper. And we're going to talk about that and the role of integration for special purpose vehicle. And we're going to compare some of this integration to IPD, Integrated Project Delivery. For that, we're going to talk about some of the foundations of IPD. And then we're going to talk about the factors that we use to assess integration, and we're going to end with conclusions and future work. Are you able to hear well? Because I'm hearing echo myself. Can you hear me well? Okay. If I'm shouting into the mic, just let me know. One? Okay. All right, so first, let's talk about PPPs. So PPPs is one procurement route between two entities, which is the public and the private sector to deliver a public asset or service. And usually it happens for these projects that require some sort of involvement from the private sector, whether it is related to funding or operations or maintenance, or actually the actual construction of that project. So what are the benefits of PPPs and why they are used? The first is because many times the public budget is stressed out, so usually they relieve that using private financing. Some other times it's because of the skill of the private sector, whether it is in designing and building a certain type of project, whether it is a bridge or some other types of work, or whether it is in operating, because some companies are very good with operations, suppose operating an airport. So that's why they're engaged. And the third one is because they promise, at least this is what they promise improvements in terms of time, cost, and quality. Most of these PPP projects, they are delivered through a main entity who is called a special purpose vehicle. We're not talking about a vehicle, I'm not talking about a car, we're talking about an organization. It's a mini organization that represents the consortium. It's called a special purpose vehicle. So what does it do? It represents this whole consortium, and it represents the stakeholders. It enters usually in a contract with the public entity for a long period of time, usually 20, 30 years or maybe longer. And the public authority is usually the end customer or one of the customers. So what does the special purpose vehicle brings under its umbrella? It brings under its umbrella many things. Definitely the finance, because it brings the private equity holders on board. It brings the designers and the builders of that project. And it brings also the operation and maintenance, operators and those who are going to maintain the facility, all under one umbrella, and it represents all of these different stakeholders. So this is the main role of SPV, is bringing those two different worlds, the world of design builders and the world of operation and maintenance under one umbrella, and then it also engages money from those equity stakeholders who bring money into the project. As you can see, it's really important as an SPV that they're bringing all these people on board. One of the main challenges is aligning all these stakeholder interests to deliver that project. And this is really very difficult. This is where the idea of integration, how can you integrate these all different stakeholders under this SPV? This is where the idea came from. And here we kind of start to draw some similarities with integrated project delivery, or IPD. So, but unfortunately, the literature does not talk about integration or inside the SPV. If you go and look at the literature, there's so many things about SPV, tons of literature, but there's very little that talks about the level of integration and how you establish that integration, or how to measure the level of integration inside the SPV. So this is where the need to investigate this integration, and the outcome of this research at the end is to actually develop a tool to assess that level of integration. So the research goal is investigate SPV project delivery and level of integration, and we're going to use IPD knowledge in here. The research output basically to identify those characteristics that reflect integration. So if I'm saying this is an integrated SPV, how is that reflected? How would I know? This is the first part. And the second one is the second part of this is to identify those, what we call them critical success factors for this integration. The research significance is that we know that integration is if you want, a prerequisite and an outcome for the success of the project, but there's no research on how the integration is achieved. So this is where the research significance, it will be the first study that will put actually a tool to measure the level of integration for an SPV. This is the methodology. So a literature review was performed on PPP projects and on IPD systems, because we're drawing some conclusions from IPD. We're learning something there to apply it on PPPs. And project stakeholder integration in general, whether it is PPPs or otherwise. Then generating a list of SPV characteristics that impact this integration. The next will be also collecting critical success factors from studies on stakeholder integration, then generating those critical success factors, and the last one will be identifying, filtering, prioritizing, etc. What will not be mentioned here in this paper is that the follow-up will be also a method of weighing or applying different weights for the different factors so that we can arrive to a integration level. So let's go back to the SPV characteristics. So here I'm going to draw some similarities. And first we're going to talk about SPV characteristics in terms of integration. Number one, what's really important is to align the interests of the different teams. And here we're talking about contractual schemes. If the contractual setup is not an enabler for that, then we're going to be in trouble. And the next one is also, I'm going to talk about the structures. It's really important, the structure. What is the structure of this organization? And the involvement of the service provider. It's very important that those also people who are going to run the facility, how they are involved early on. The second one is a whole life cycle approach. So we have to look at really long into the future. There's a little bit of difference in the PPP delivery, is that in the traditional approach, if you're designing a certain facility, you're not usually the one who's maintaining it or or operating it for that time. But here, it's the team who's responsible for this. So the facility operator is really important in this formula. And then we need to bundling, is the bundling of project functions. You're talking about which functions are there. The functions of designing, building, financing, operating, and maintaining. So all of these functions, they need to be bundled under one umbrella. And usually it's a long-term contract, and so many things can go wrong. So you have to think for the long term. I shouldn't just be thinking of the low cost for a certain pavement. Why? Why I'm not thinking this way? Because I'm the one who's going to maintain it for the next 30 years. So I have to also think of that. And then we're going to talk about one part here is about collaborative environments, which is early stakeholder involvement, involve those people who are going to operate it early on, and it is the structure is very important here. So I'll move on. As you can see, there is different similarities between the level of integration needed for the SPV and the level of integration that is already mentioned in the IPD literature. So integrated project delivery, there's a lot of studies that talked about the level of integration. So here I'm going to project some of those ideas from IPD into PPP. So basically I'm going to talk about three things that Thompson et al. Mentioned. There is three foundations for the success of an IPD integration. And these three foundations are the following. The organization structure, how this is organized. Second is the commercial framework. And the third is operating systems and processes. So I'm going to explain a little bit about those. So number one is early stakeholder involvement. So basically here, bringing people early on into the project. The second one is integrated team. Are they solving problems as a separate, or each one on their own, or as a team? The third one is the core group. Core group is very important in IPD project because they are responsible for governing the project. They are the ones who make the decisions. So this is the first one. The second one is commercial terms. So basically collective risk management and pain sharing and gain sharing. Everybody should share the risks and rewards. So this is the second one. And the third one is on the operation side, we're talking about the technology that is used, how they're sharing information, etc. So these are the developed factors under these three different families. So we develop these critical success factors that we will use for measuring integration. So I'll go really briefly, I don't have, for the interest of time. So under the first one, organizational structure, we're gonna go and investigate the organization. And we're doing this on, at least till now, 2 case studies. One is in Lebanon, the other one is an international project where we're investigating those factors. The first one is creation of a single integrated team. Are the teams co-located? Means are they working together in the same place? They're sharing information, etc. Early involvement of the parties, creation of an integrated team, creation of multidisciplinary team, etc. So previous history of teams, do they work together? So here we're talking about how the team is organized. So all of these factors, they're talking about team organization, how they deal with each other on a day-to-day basis. The second one is the commercial framework. So here we're talking about contracts, we're talking about how things are. So presence of a multi-party agreement, how they're sharing risks and rewards. For example, if the contractor on the project has a very low share on the project, I can tell you from now, this is a recipe for disaster. Because they are not sharing the risks, so for them, if the cost goes up or there is more things, they're happy. So this is where there should be an equitable balance between those. So pain sharing and gain sharing, collective agreement for sharing of risk, withdrawal is discouraged, suing each other is discouraged because this is a one team working. So these are all very important under this title. The third one is the operating system. This is very important. Many people focus on this, especially when we talk about tools, we talk about last man system, value stream mapping, we talk about IPD, we focus on those. These are operating systems, but if we don't have the previous ones, we don't have organization, we don't have the commercial terms, this will not function. So here we're talking about use of appropriate technology, how they are sharing information, collective project management. So these are some of the factors that are out there, but they're all related to the technology used and the enabling processes. Finally, I'll end with the conclusion. Definitely the SPV as a similar to the core group on an IPD project, they are bearing if you want, all the management of the project, and it's similar to as I mentioned, the core group. It is important that PPP projects also learn from the progress in if you want, IPD literature and from Lean. So this will be, I think, some of the early efforts of bringing Lean into PPP projects. And it is, as I mentioned, this is part of a wider effort. Hopefully, in the future conferences, I'll report the results, because right now we are in the process of number one, putting weights on the different factors using AHP process, and third is applying it to actual case study projects to measure that integration and to see if there is a correlation between integration and performance. Hopefully we'll report that in future conferences. And this research introduces the lean vein into PPP procurement route, and if you want, evaluates PPP project success in terms of certain integration criteria that we have developed for this project. So that's all what I have. Thank you very much. Thank you.